Record this session with Zoom. Hope that's okay for everybody. Welcome. Tom Zollner from FarmTech Society. We started this idea in a relatively short session because we had this conversation, Alexa and I, over a nice lunch at the Rubismo meeting. Rubismo is rural business models. And then within a few days, I had a conversation with Henry Gordon Smith, who said, "I'll be in Brussels. Can we do something interesting?" So I said, "Why not do a meeting on this topic?" He immediately jumped on it. So then we started to put together a short list of people we thought we can try to do this session with the idea to really start a conversation about this, because it appears that it's a topic which is vaguely known, and the science is still out there, but there seems to be indication that there is an interesting relationship for agriculture to take some role in climate mitigation. Anyway, the impacts are obvious. We all know that. When you look at this map, this is the map from the paper I also provided in the invitation. When you look at Europe and you look at the industrialized areas of North America and Asia, subcontinents in India, it's just absolutely mind-boggling how the color red is from orange to dark red, which means that there's no real difference anymore between rural or kind of regions which are not built up under the term of metropolitan space and sort of nature. This includes France, Scandinavia, the southern part of Scandinavia for sure. But when you look at the Mediterranean, then it's really devastating because it's actually really red hot everywhere. Black is cool, -2. Yeah. I think the color doesn't translate well. Huh? Yeah. That's cool. Yeah. Anyway, this was a map which is a little closer up. This was from the same paper. This was done by a guy named Gabriel, who's the lead scientist. I asked him about this. He responded, but he's too busy to deal with this. He's now teaching in London at forgot the name of the institution. My apology, but we'll figure this out later on. However, he and his team kind of put a relationship between the urban heat island and the impact of the regional weather and the different geography. And the apparent is that if you have the heat island effect build up temperature over the summer, that it will create a kind of a change in the regional weather pattern, which will alter precipitation overall. This is sort of like a rough description, which I have gathered out of the outcome of the paper. Now, it's a kind of a quick and dirty analysis, and they did compare a lot of data from a lot of different cities and compare that also with regional weather data. And this is now really a very clear indication that we have a relationship between the urban heat island and the weather pattern in the surrounding areas. Now, what's really obviously, or not obviously, what is a big question mark here is the mitigation varies completely according to geography. I mean, mitigation for urban heat island is nothing new. We all know that greening up the city is not only a benefit for a better life quality for the inhabitants of the city, but also will mitigate the urban heat island. But this is obviously something to be understood as a completely different regions, different climates. For instance, the paper says that in a wet climate, this does not necessarily work so well. Even greening a city as climate mitigation in a wet climate, in a subtropical or tropical climate, will not do what we anticipate. Likewise, we have an opposite effect in drier climates where the effects are even more dramatic. I mean, I was in a group of architects working on turning the former airport in Riyadh, which is in the middle of the city, into a park. And then we modeled what will be the impact for the city, and this is hugely dramatic because
Positive or negative?
positive. Of course, you know, Riyadh is really terrible in terms of actually green space.
Yes.
And it's a really horrific climate. I mean, it's like 50 degrees during the daytime, 16 degrees during nighttime. You have a desert climate, and you have also built up urban environments, which makes it really, really difficult to deal with. However, you know, there are, sorry? The park. Yeah. The park is 14 square kilometers. It's a former military airport, and it will make a huge difference for the big city.
And should we talk about the reason why in wet climates greening the city doesn't have the same cooling effect as it does in a dry climate?
I wish we had some climate scientists who can actually lean into this, but it's definitely a very important point. Huh?
Yeah.
I would say this is well noted and we need to really understand that much better in order to do it. Also, you know, one size doesn't fit all. This is it. This falls under this category. Yeah.
I think it relates to humidity probably above all, and as plants evapotranspirate, they create more humidity. So if there's humidity in the air already, then they can't actually evapotranspirate and sweat.
Exactly.
So that's the effect of cooling is mitigated. The same way in a greenhouse, if you have evaporative cooling in a greenhouse and it's a humid climate, evaporative cooling won't perform.
Exactly. Same thing. Very good analogy. Excellent. What you have also challenging is, of course, that the urban environment and the metropolitan places are also dealing with population growth at the same time with challenges in climate change. So that makes this a real big challenge. So, you know, it's a crisis, but of course, you know, we have an understanding of certain relationships. In my conversations as the Secretary General for FarmTech and as an expert in controlled environment agriculture, I always observe the really, you know, silos of rural agriculture and also urban agriculture more recently, which is the new kids on the block who do a lot of different things, including CSA or rooftop gardens or greenhouses, etc. Make most in what we call vertical farm, daylight independent growing completely. This is, of course, the same aim, the same business model, but two completely different, you know, communities, and they do not really see each other as that related. And this is kind of like something what I identify as a possibility, as we can actually try to break down those silos and try to breach and build a relationship exchange of knowledge. Huh? I mean, that is also the base of our conversation, Alexa, when we had how do we really get urban deep knowledge in agriculture from the urban agriculture communities into the urban agriculture communities, because, you know, they benefit really also from this, and vice versa. Urban agriculture can also stimulate, you know, the business models of conventional rural agriculture. However, you know, when we're now talking about climate mitigation, it's much larger than just growing food for a local population. It is also perhaps a factor X, which we don't know, which could contribute as a climate mitigation factor. And then, of course, the biggest challenge is the integration policy, how you actually really get these silos moving and you know, have something of an exchange going on or going forward. No, that can actually enhance. That can actually make it worse. Huh?
Ask any question. Just make sure you ask them loud enough. This is the microphone, this computer. So we'll move it closer if you need to, but maybe you guys can project into it.
Can you hear us okay?
And Oscar, if you can mute. I think you're doing some cooking at the same time. So.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. Sorry.
No problem. Yeah, this is an important question. Do greenhouses, can they reduce can they cool?
What we see developing on at least high-tech vertical or rooftop farming is greenhouse. But I don't know if they're ventilated. Maybe this cooling can also get out. I don't know. Is there any signs of this?
Structurally speaking, they're actually like a, you know, glass tower, more or less. You know, they're not really actually mitigating in a our understanding of what what it would mean. However, these projects tend to be also integrative in terms of having actually surrounding areas of the greenhouse which are actually then greened up. Like you have never the possibility to build a greenhouse to the full extent of an actual rooftop. You always have sections of the roof which you will use for other things, like an outdoor space, like outdoor gardening or whatever. And that could be looked at as an interesting ratio. Of course, what do we do with rooftops and greenhouses is another question. But in your experience in New York, what do you think?
Yeah, so if you had a vacant lot in a city and you put a greenhouse on top of it, it would most likely be warmer, typically. It would increase the heat island effect issue. If it was on a rooftop, it would also most likely increase the heat island effect issue. The reason is that you're trying to maintain a consistent temperature for the plants. That temperature is going to maybe be cooler in the summertime than it is outside, but in the wintertime, in somewhere like Brussels, it'll be warmer. Either way, whatever excess heat there is, whatever is not the desired temperature, is going to be pushed out into the environment. However, greenhouses do provide insulation in the winter. So I think every single site has to have its own calculation when it relates to greenhouses, because there could be benefits in the winter that could outweigh the costs of evapotranspiration or the excess heat that's pushed out of the greenhouse in the summertime. I think there are potential models to integrate greenery into greenhouses. You obviously don't want to block too much light, but you could create certain structures, reflective structures, different materials in the future that could change this. Because as long as you kind of have less heat, light is going in, but less heat going to the greenhouse, this could be a benefit. But overall, short answer is a greenhouse wouldn't have the same benefits of cooling as a green roof or a soil-based outdoor rooftop farm.
There's also an interesting correlation between scale in a greenhouse. I mean, today, when you are planning a greenhouse on a rooftop and you have less than a hectare of a scale at your disposal, that is very hard to make commercial sense.
Yes.
From a commercial perspective in a traditional greenhouse operation. So one could argue easily is like maybe it's not such a smart idea to do, aside from, let's say, educational, technological research purposes, to really build greenhouses well less than 1 hectare. And that eliminates, of course, most rooftops in a common sense. And then it will maybe move the greenhouse more into kind of a peri-urban and into the more traditional land zones, which is agriculture, where it is right now. However, there are also needs to have greenhouses closer to the point of consumption. So there is also a point to be made that it is actually also interesting to bring greenhouses closer to the consumers.
Can I add a bit of nuance to that as well? I mean, at the
Yes,
moment, when you're talking about sort of just commercial models of greenhouse production, you're not including the other kind of more social, the more educational, the more
Right.
this.
Absolutely.
Because that's where you get multiplier effects in the lateral domain, where like if you were to sort of, as Henry's doing, if you had a strong grow your own movement that was catalyzed by sky vegetables, and you had a whole load of people growing their own and finding their little patches on their rooftop and doing it, at volume, but in terms of numbers, not actual volume of production, then you could have quite significant effects. But we won't know until we reach that point where prices start to activate that kind of behavior change.
That's right.
I think it's a great point. I think actually, Oscar, there's a case for rooftop greenhouses that are community focused, not production focused, that include soil or include much more variety of plants.
Yep.
Which would actually could have a cooling effect if you open the greenhouse.
Definitely. So the project that I worked on. Oh, sorry. Please.
Well, it's similar to the one you were working on as well, but I heard of one recently in the Netherlands too, where it's community plots, and basically the greenhouse just serves to protect it from rain. And in that case, that could have a cooling effect.
So the one that I worked in as part of the growth project with the Interreg funded group was a project in Mannheim where it was a sort of lean-to greenhouse surrounded by soil-based sort of allotments which were going to be made available to members. And then there was an event space, and then there was a restaurant and a cafe, and that kind of mixed program, which basically sets the grow your own sort of message within a lifestyle. And it becomes a hangout, and that's where the more important thing, which is the conversation about food systems, sort of occurs.
Absolutely.
That kind of thing at this stage is where rooftop greenhouses might make an impact. But I mean, you're largely right. Unless you have like if you had a vegetable that only had 1 day's worth of shelf life or 2 days worth of shelf life, which sold very well because it had a unique flavor. There's no very easy way of integrating rooftop greenhouses into a city for a commercial model.
Oscar, can you make a little distance to the microphone because there's a lot of.
Oh, is it horrible? Right, sorry.
These are all very important aspects to look at. I mean, I would like to keep this conversation on a high level, and of course we are getting into the nitty gritty. I believe that the greenhouse has a place in the city, absolutely. I think when I look at the consumer preference today, which is going very clearly towards healthier diet, healthy nutrition, also more transparency, really also a big value in food safety. I wonder if this is also something we could look at as a driver for consumption, that we would add food production, who helps also do climate mitigation. I mean, of course, people think sustainability means also climate mitigation. That's not always the case, which is interesting to really analyze and understand, particularly when we want to bring more food production closer to the point of consumption. So this is something I'm throwing out there. If this, because, I'm working a lot with consumer organizations, and they all are like pointing that the millennials are the ones who really want to have healthy food. They want to know everything about it, and they want to have it as close as possible and directly from the producers. But would they also be willing to see the value of a product under the climate mitigation regimen, which needs to be looked at for food production particularly? I'm leaving this as an open question, of course, and here just.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What is the impact of the mitigation? What's the mitigation factor in relationship to the overwhelming situation?
Okay, World Health Organization has determined that per capita we need 9 square meters of green space to have a minimum of life quality. Now that doesn't take into account any climate mitigation, but you can also say that if we are aiming for 9 square meter green space per capita, they will have a certain impact as climate mitigation, because that means we will need to green up the city considerable.
How far are we from that figure?
Pardon me?
How far are we from that figure?
It depends which city.
Yeah.
I mean, London is more than 9 square meter, for instance, which is a surprise, but that's one of the few cities who already have that. And 9 square meter at the end is just a minimum. So we also have to think about this could be enlarged, particularly if you are a drier climate. I mean, for Riyadh, we figured out we need to be somewhere around 30 square meters per capita. But, again, I haven't really paid that much attention to the climate mitigation factor on this, because that needs to be obviously also factored in. Just briefly, FarmTech Society, because we're new on the block, we're actually a bunch of older experts and younger experts, and we all started pretty much with a similar idea and goal. Henry and I were both starting in Association for Vertical Farming. However, we're based now here in Brussels with the idea to be an umbrella organization addressing primarily policy topics, also work heavily in education, and bring standardization into innovation, which is controlled environment agriculture. This is how our mission is determined. I mean, this is the list of where we see our stakeholders or our members ideally are coming from to tackle a topic like this climate mitigation or knowledge transfer for this. So I'm closing my bit here, and I guess we do Henry first, huh?
As far as the agenda,
yeah, okay.
Should we do some introductions?
Yes, let's do a quick round of introduction. And it's okay if I take the introduction.
Yeah, you can tape
additional.
The introductions of who we are.
Yeah,
sure. But you have to go first.
I'm Tom Zollner from FarmTech Society. We're here with a design thinking session and on the topic of urban heat island effects and the knowledge transfer possibility in agriculture.
Hi, my name is Alexandre Lefebvre. I'm here from my business is Alobe. I am an expert in urban farming for different people. And I'm also here for an association of professionals. It's ABOP, Association Bruxelloise pour l'Agriculture Urbaine Professionnelle. And also for AFOP, it's Association Française for Agriculture Urbaine Professionnelle. And they can't be here today because they have another meeting in Brussels about quite the same thematic. Okay. And I will talk about it after. But I'm here also to explain to them what we discussed here, and Anne-Cécile and also Anouk, etc. from France. I'm also a beekeeper in the city, and I produce hop and beer in the city. Hops and beer. Excellent.
Hi, I'm Henry Gordon Smith. I live in New York City, but I'm the founder of a global urban agriculture consulting firm called Agritecture. We recently joined the FarmTech Society, and today I'll be sharing a little bit about our new design software to design urban farming solutions. And last time I was in Brussels, I got stung by Alex's bees right here under my eye, so be careful.
Okay, that won't happen today because we have
it's cold.
0 degrees. Bees are still alive.
Hi, my name is Nelly Laus. I work for Boerenbond. That's an association of farmers in Flanders and the German-speaking region of Belgium. We help farmers on different topics, but also bringing them together to discuss business models. More specifically, what I do in the association is to help newcomers in agriculture, so often people without an agricultural background. For example, the urban farmers at one stage, but also in the more rural areas where we're talking about regenerative farming. Also, those people we want to help them with the existing knowledge that is there already, and also bring them together or in contact with existing farmers again to share knowledge and to bring everybody further together.
My name is Stefan Frey. I'm a member of the FarmTech Society board, and my background is agrochemicals.
Hi, I'm Alexia Ruby. I am an agroeconomist by training. I work for the European Commission, DG Agri, for agriculture and rural development in the unit in charge of research and innovation. So in this unit, we do two things. We handle the agriculture and rural part of the Horizon 2020 program, Horizon Europe tomorrow, so the EU's framework program for research and innovation. And we also handle the EIP Agri, the European Innovation Partnership for Agricultural Productivity and Sustainability, which is funded, has funds also some projects under the Common Agricultural Policy. And within this, myself, I'm in charge of more rural research, so territorial linkages, rural economy, beyond farming, so the rural aspect. I also manage stakeholder engagement, especially approaches, participatory leadership, social innovation. I follow smart specialization, so regional policy. And also I'll be one of the persons in charge of the proposal we have for the partnership. So partnership is a cooperation between the EU and member states on agroecology through the setting up of living houses.
Fantastic, great.
And last but not least, urban farming. Like my idea.
Well, then we can have Oscar, maybe you say something.
Sorry, did you say me?
Yeah,
yes.
You're going
to
introduce yourself to
the
camera.
Hi, Oscar Rodriguez, architect, started a design consultancy called Architecture and Food. Does what it says on the tin. Haven't built anything, which is quite sad. But I've been at it for a few years. And London is way behind, and I want to be European. Yeah, Yeah, the main focus is the rooftop greenhouse and anything that basically alludes to how the architecture of building integrated agriculture has to change.
Great.
Thanks. Nicole, can you say?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself first. Hi, my name's Nicole. I am a co-founder of Cultinova. We specialize in bespoke solutions for sustainable cities and sustainable food systems. So that's monitoring and control solutions. And since I work on the intersection between food and cities, I am very keen to break down those silos that Tom mentioned earlier, and very much welcome being part of this conversation here, because I think it's really important to look at the aspect of green infrastructure as well as the food aspect in sort of in an integrated fashion rather than silo thinking. So yeah, that's me.
Thanks. And finally, Mark Horler.
Hey, I'm Mark. I do a bit of work with the FarmTech Society, and also I'm the founder of UK Urban Agritech, which is a similar sort of organisation but operating at the national scale in the UK. Yeah, I've kind of been around for a while. I started out with Henry and Tom elsewhere and sort of found my way through, and here I am.
Reunion.
Very good.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Now we're switching on to New York, and maybe Henry, you can go for it.
Sure. So, hi again, everyone. Can you hear me on the phone? Yes?
Yes.
Yep, yeah, all good.
Screen. Sorry. Loading. Come on. So hopefully this will load soon. I'm based in New York City. I sound American, but I'm European. So at least we can think the same way. And yeah, that's what happened. It went to the wrong view. Sorry about that. I just want to get to this thing. Just needs to move out of the way. Okay, I'm getting closer. This thing is just in my way over here.
Yeah, it was before too. I don't know how to get rid of it. Yeah.
I apologize. High, low. There we go. Okay, we're gonna get there. Now it's.
What is it? The internet or?
No, it's. I don't know why it keeps going to the use slideshow. Okay, that's fine actually. Hang tight 1 second, folks. Okay, that should be good now. So I am an urban agriculture consultant. I first got interested in urban agriculture during my undergraduate degree when I was looking at studying political science, and I was actually looking at water wars, and I was trying to understand how cities could respond to climate change and their ability to be more independent than governments. And so my presentation today, unfortunately, there's some similarities because many of you have seen me talk before. So I'll try to go through those as quickly as possible, the ones that are similar, and get to some of the things we're doing next. While the focus of my presentation isn't exclusively or isn't emphasizing urban heat island effect, I will strive to make connections to that topic today. And our company is Agritecture Consulting. So just as a bit of background, I was born in Hong Kong. My father's an engineer, so I grew up in a city that is one of the densest on Earth. Really, I do not have a green thumb at all. I did not grow up with that. I moved to Tokyo when I was 6. This is where I started getting more exposed to technology and its role in the built environment, and also how we can really manage resources in a very interesting way when you're in such a dense environment. I graduated high school in Moscow, Russia, a city that is, I would say, ripe with waste and enormity. And then it was in Vancouver, beautiful Vancouver, British Columbia, where I started getting exposed to sustainability. And the reason was that Vancouver has a plan to be the greenest city in the world by 2020. It's an ambitious goal to do that. And they had a variety of initiatives around solar panels, autonomous electric vehicles. They even have food waste management, water management, transportation, bike lanes have really become proliferated in Vancouver. But what they didn't have was they didn't have a plan to maintain the food security of the city throughout the 21st century. And so I thought that was interesting, and I wanted to know why. And as I started talking to city leaders, they simply didn't understand agriculture. And it makes sense because we've moved agriculture out of our cities. And so what's happened is those who are leading the development of our cities simply don't know how to prioritize or consider from a planning perspective the typologies that are possible to achieve a specific goal. So for example, if Vancouver wanted to reduce its urban heat island effect, yes, it could look at green roofs as an option, but urban agriculture is a bit more complicated. In order for the city planners to be armed to respond to that, they need to understand soil depth, they need to understand typical cost per square foot, labor, minimum scale, all these data points to be good decision makers from a planning perspective. So I started a blog to essentially share ideas about the full spectrum, what I call the full spectrum of urban agriculture, with other people. And I connected with an international audience that was also motivated by this topic, and they contributed ideas, and we've done events, etc. So this is me visiting a vertical farm in Vancouver and reporting on it very soon after I launched my blog. And this farm actually failed, and so it was interesting to start to share some of the things that went wrong with this. This was a farm that was also funded by the city. It was kind of a rooftop, 800 square meter boxed greenhouse. It was quite interesting. Why it failed, we can talk about at the end if you have questions, but this is a vertical farm. So we gather knowledge. I wanted to share ideas, and I wanted to expose this challenge of urbanization and specific challenges related around it. One of them we'll focus on today is urban heat island effect. We already know that cities are even moving further to be the demand source for food. I don't need to tell you that, but it's quite dramatic when you think 80% of food will be consumed in cities, and there are almost no cities in the world that have strategic plans to protect the food supply. Cities used to also be developed with agriculture in mind. Manhattan used to have farms on it. The United States population about a little over 100 years ago had over 50% of the population involved in agriculture. Now that's less than 5%. So there's been dramatic shifts as we've prioritized different kinds of urban development, and one of those consequences has been the increased consequences of hot summers on elderly populations, young populations, health, and the energy consumption of cities in the summertime. So these are issues that I'm passionate about, which are typically around supply, but I think we can connect them to urban heat island as well. So we have a podcast called Locally Grown In, where we look at different cities and we analyze the challenges and opportunities for food production. We've done Brussels, and some of our colleagues here are on that episode. And so Sydney was our first episode. And 20% of the food consumed in Sydney is sourced within 100 miles of the city. Because of urban development, that's going to be 6% in the next 10 years, or a little over 10 years. So I think that's pretty scary, and I think that that's only one of the consequences of that. There's other consequences, including a loss of transparency about the food system, a loss of jobs and knowledge related to agriculture, and then of course, urban heat island effect. If Sydney is going to get warmer in those 10 years, and we are reducing the amount of green space that exists in Sydney. What's promising is that a study showed that if there was a strategic plan the city had made to protect it, 14% of that food supply could be maintained, even with the population growth projections. So there are actually ways to do this. Why isn't it happening in Sydney? Well, it's typical policy bureaucracy issues. There's 34 kind of municipalities in the Sydney area, and they don't collaborate very effectively. There's not one overarching one that could make a decision as it relates to food. So there's a lot of foundational steps that would need to be made to create such a policy. Toronto is also going to have numerous challenges related to urban heat island effect. Toronto is the fastest growing city in North America. The Ontario, the province it's located in, is one of the richest places for agriculture in the northern parts of the United States and moving into North America, which is called Upper Canada, used to be called Upper Canada. And it's actually, parts of Ontario are as south as Rome. So there's areas where there's actually a lot of warmth and there's really good soil. And it used to actually be a net exporter of food, but as a result of urban developments now already become a net importer of food in the last 20 years. So that increases the bill, but what's really more of the issue here as it relates to this is we are taking soil and its ability to absorb carbon and reduce heat waves from the sun, and we're turning it into suburbs with insufficient green space. Dubai is kind of on the opposite end. Like Riyadh, it's has no arable land, extremely hot climate, but unlike Riyadh, like Riyadh as well, it has rapid urban development. So their focus is going to be a lot more on indoor spaces. Why? Because the water needed to produce the greenery that would cool the space is less viable here. So when we look at a place like Dubai, I don't think it's going to be green space as much as maybe reflective surfaces, what we call white roofs, that might respond to that. So painting roads white instead of black. These are the strategies that would help Dubai probably cool in a low-cost way. I'll skip this one. This is just sort of an economic estimate from last year's Google Earth study of the potential for urban agriculture from an economic perspective. This is accounting for ecosystem services in addition to food production. So this is the low end. It's estimated at $80 to $160 billion. That translates to about 10% of our global supply of vegetables that could be grown in cities. This was an analysis of available rooftop spaces, vacant spaces, and even some minor indoor spaces were considered here. So ecosystem services, including rainwater management, biodiversity, and reducing the heat island effect were considered in this study. What's exciting now is that the trend towards urban agriculture is accelerating. Policy is following that. We're seeing the third directive of urban agriculture has sprung up in the United States in DC, following Philadelphia and Atlanta. Investment is going up, mostly focused on the high-tech side, but regenerative agriculture now is really getting popular in the investment world in the US, which is exciting. And these are basically some data points that I think are showing a shift towards an increased value of growing food in the city. So Alex and I discussed this a lot, so I'll just say it up front. I call this a technology spectrum, but you could also look at it from a investment spectrum, right? So on the high end is much more higher investment than the low end, but also the technology tends to be higher in the other end, but there are ways to make the lower end a little bit more high tech as well, especially as certain technologies get cheaper. What we're really talking about as it relates to urban heat island effect are the ones on the low end of this spectrum. Rooftop farms, soil-based outdoor farms and plots. Things that are not considered here that will reduce urban heat island effect are vertical tree projects or vertical gardens. I don't include them because I focus on food production, but there are some, like you could have hops that do produce food that could potentially have a cooling effect on certain facades. You could have types of trees and orchards that could also do that, and those would be somewhere within that area. Greenhouses, again, are going to typically increase, I would say, the heat island effect in warmer cities or cities with warm summers. And I think that projects like aerofarms probably actually increase the temperature as well around the warehouse because that heat has to go somewhere. And vertical farms typically have challenges around cooling, not around heating. So if you have vertical farms added to your city, it could be thought of like a data center, an industrial type of structure that creates a lot of heat. And so city planners would also need to think about this in the future. Yeah.
Do we get a copy of that?
You can get a copy of some of it. I can send it to you, yeah. So I like to break it down into very basic impacts of urban agriculture. The aesthetic impact is important to transform the way we think about our cities and green spaces. Because we become disconnected, we also don't value it so much. Social impact, one of the primary ones I want to focus on here is the inclusion of immigrant populations, which is only going to get more of a challenge as climate-induced migration increases globally. 350 million total estimated by 2020. that's going to accelerate rapidly to 2050. So these gardens, these especially outdoor ones with more diversity, there's evidence from Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, New York, Miami, that they provide spaces where immigrant populations can learn the language, but they can also share what they grow and how they grow. Economic benefits tend to come from the higher tech side because they have more job creation, they can grow year round. But the environmental benefits are typically less common on the high end, especially as you go to vertical farms. They're less direct, I would say. And so what we're talking about here is, again, the cooling of the city. So that's really one of the environmental benefits. But with soil-based urban agriculture, you also get biodiversity benefits, water management, which is also a major issue. I think most cities that are having issues with cooling are also having issues with biodiversity, for example. And many cities that are having issues with cooling that are in temperate climates are also having issues with water management, as there's nowhere for the water to go when severe rain happens. So what Agritecture does briefly is we basically consult and provide data based on the work that I did as a blogger and visiting farms and observing trends and researching the topic. And also we built a team of experts that consult and go through various methodologies. This is our feasibility study methodology, a step-by-step process to help reduce risks and match our clients with the right kind of urban farm, and all the various data to allow them to raise money and implement that farm. This is an example of my team. We have horticulturalists, engineers, sustainability managers. Most of my team are millennials, so we really connect with that, I would say, social entrepreneurship aspect of urban agriculture. We consult entrepreneurs, but we also consult some cities on strategies. I won't go too much into that. This is our impact to date. So quite a diverse set of projects. For example, in Auckland, a very simple and interesting issue there was that it's the only part of New Zealand that has flat land. So if you want to grow leafy greens and vegetables, that is the place to grow it. But it's also the biggest population center that's growing rapidly. And so they're not protecting the farmland. So they're going to become a net importer of lettuce in the future unless they protect that. So these are some of the interesting nuances for various parts. And these projects have illuminated my understanding of how important context is when matching the right type of urban farm to solve the problem. I'm going to skip through some of these quickly. This is a vertical farm we worked on in Manhattan, an indoor one. This is a vertical farm we've worked on in Brooklyn, mostly an urban agriculture accelerator program. So each of these containers, in the winter, they're going to be producing heat. They're going to be emitting heat out of those containers. So that is a pollution consideration if you're in a hot climate. In the summertime, it'll be hotter. We suggested to this client that they make more of a campus, a circular campus of these structures, and have kind of tents over them so that they could maximize the interior area during the warm summer, and put green roofs on top of them to cool them. But what tends to happen on the high-tech side is the drive and demand, at least in the United States, the drive and the demand for consistent data and investors that just want to focus on the bottom line cut out anything that relates to circular economy or greenery in that way. So it's much more difficult to get private clients motivated by these topics than it is in the EU, I find. But they produce food and they sell it, and they've been successful as a business. They've expanded to their second location. The city of Paris, I think, is a really fantastic example of what we're talking about, mostly because they approached the challenge around biodiversity and urban agriculture as making the city an incubator. And so they negotiated with developers, different sites that urban farmers could submit business plans for, and then they would get 5 to 10-year leases to utilize them. Some of those leases were free, some of them were discounted, but essentially they structured the deals in advance that made it quite simple for the entrepreneurs to fit within those deals and make proposals. It wasn't perfect, but what they've been able to do is to create really a destination to learn about urban agriculture on their website, and they've achieved, according to them, they've achieved 16 hectares of overall urban farming space in the city in under 5 years. So it's, I think, relative to any city on earth, that is the most leadership that's been shown for urban agriculture in a major developed city. And these are mostly soil-based farms, and thus are could have a measurable effect on cooling the city, but they are combined also with the overall city's green initiative. So they have a 300-hectare goal to green all of the city. And so urban agriculture is just 10% of that. So I think if you look at the total impact, it'd be interesting to compare the benefits of the urban farms and their impact on cooling plus the other benefits versus projects that just focus on cooling. Toronto, another project we worked on is the city in Toronto, a $50 million smart city there, and integrating agriculture to that. And some of those ideas were for cooling. So moving to the future, we want to make it very easy for anybody interested in this topic to get involved. So not only people that are motivated and are the appropriate fit for consulting, but people who have ideas and are motivated to put in the work. They should be able to design their own urban farm very easily. So today I will demonstrate what that means. We just tomorrow, 50 individuals out of 300 are getting the email announced that they're going to be our beta testers for the designer, which is our first digital product. So what the Architecture Designer is it's a digital planning tool for urban farming. It's targeted entrepreneurs, but it would have benefits for architects, developers, investors that are doing due diligence, policymakers as well. The reason is because it's going to be a very affordable way to estimate typical costs for different kinds of farms. Now, today I'm going to demonstrate the first part of the product, which is the free concept development tool, and then I'll demonstrate the paid version of the product as well, which is this last screen here, which allows you to do a 10-year projection. And play.
Is it conceivable that you have also parameters of the, let's say, the heat emission generated by the project?
Yeah, so I'll talk about what we're doing now,
okay.
And then I'll talk about where it's going to go.
Yeah.
Because we're a small company with 8 full-time employees. We've self-funded the development of this product. We have 100K in angel investment committed to helping it to grow, but we're going to need more if we want to make it useful to every city and every entrepreneur on earth. So step by step, but I'll talk about what we're doing now. And the reasons are because this is what people are interested in now. This is what our audience wants today. So this is what we're offering them. So the purpose of the product, hopefully play, is to hone your vision, build your plan. Sorry, it's very choppy. And expedite your progress, move further. I don't know why it's so choppy. Let me let it load. Nope, it's on this computer, but it's just a bit overloaded. So this is the landing page essentially, and then they'll go through this and learn a few things. It's about saving time. They're kind of advertised about our impact. And then what they can do is...
So you have the accumulation of all the data from these projects, which are
so
the basis.
What we do is, I'm really sorry, I have to pull up the right one. This is not going to be impactful enough. Hang tight. I'm going to try and pull up the original video. I have no idea why it's going so slowly. Maybe if I do it here. Okay, it's kind of moving. Is it choppy again? No, it's better. Okay, so it's about helping them get their ideas onto paper, as I mentioned, and then moving them towards feasibility and actual economics.
So this is somebody who has an idea, huh?
Yes, exactly. Okay. So the first part is the content development part, and I think it's going to go quickly. So they click on build, and what they can do is they can enter in certain information that they know, and then they're going to get certain information that's going to guide them to the next step. So it's like a decision tree. So they can enter in who they are, what their goal is, community or profit or environment, what the size of their team is, what stage they're at, do they want a vertical farm or a greenhouse, what experience they have, where they're going to locate their farm, what they think they want to grow, what's their sales model, and where their location is. And what it does is it accesses a database of existing farms. And what you're going to see on the next screen is their vision report, which is their vision on a single piece of, like a single piece of paper, essentially, a project plan. So this is the vision report, very simple, just what they inputted. And then they get a project timeline. So this will actually show months, typical months to build the kind of farm that they've imagined. And then we have example projects that they can dive deeper in. And the projects are rated on relevancy to their idea. The goal is to connect them with best practices and real projects. And so that's free, and they can then print that document, share that document with others. Then they can join the subscription, which is 180 days, $99 for unlimited projects. It's more if you want to take the online classes. They can access their vision report. They can look again at those inspiring projects, but this time they can do as many of those, of that first one as they want. And then they can actually build their model. So this is going to ask them to do a lot more work and detail. Right now we have it for greenhouses and vertical farms. So it's accessing a database of different kinds of farms, and based on their scale, it matches it to those models. They input certain economic data. They input data on the size of the site. A city could have that data inputted as well. And then we've loaded up density, production, harvest time, waste for a variety of typical crops that are grown in the city as a starting line. They can choose organic, which would shift some of the variables. This one's focused on vertical, so it says 4 levels there. They can override the baseline costs in the model, so adjust it to their local economics. And then they can get a financial overview of the farm, including CapEx, operating expenses, payback, and aspects of the farm like wastage, etc. This is interesting for them to look at the capital costs and where they go, where that money is going to be spent. And they can dive into the operating cost breakdown as well. And so, yeah, for this one is now where they can actually go to the stores, and then they can input unique data about the products they want to sell. So they can actually get even more precise as they do market research. They can do an unlimited number of these, and then the goal is essentially that as they finish that, they can choose what they want to do next. They can go to an equipment provider with more confidence, and they can actually share, I have a plan, I have economics, and the equipment provider can build upon that. Or they can go to a consultant that's going to be able to save time and focus on the idea that they have in more detail. But we find that if people are going into urban farming, they go through 10 steps, and steps 1 through 5 tend to be just learning the basics. We want to make that as effective as possible. So right now we're focusing on greenhouses and vertical farms because that's what our audience wants. That's a hot topic right now. But we would like to do this for any kind of urban farming model, and we're already in the process of studying various agroforestry, rooftop models, mushrooms. We're going to be looking at aquaculture and taking those models and making them accessible to anyone, anywhere to plan their business. The use case is typically entrepreneurs, but for example, the city of Guelph, which just won $10 million to do their smart city initiative, wants to use this to activate citizens. So what they're going to do is they're going to buy 200 users for this, put it onto their website, and then residents will submit their ideas, and then we will review the data with the city and match those residents together to develop the businesses that would feed the city. But you could do this for various other impacts.
School, I mean, a school could take this and
universities. Universities
I mean,
are
talking about even below university.
Yeah. So other things that we're going to add to this as well. We already have it in the background, but again, it gets complicated. So we're keeping it simple because what we have, we're confident in. But we'll add more features. We just have to test it. So we always have to validate the data with existing real operations, right. And so that takes some time. But carbon footprint could be into here, amount of water managed, the increased or decreased temperature as a result of the model could be there. And based on demand, we'll input those features. And yeah, that's really Agriculture Designer, which is just about to launch. If you're interested, you can check it out at agriculture.com/designer and put your email in, and you'll either be invited to be a beta user or you'll get the announcement when it launches. I wanted to give one idea, sorry, about, do you want to ask a question, or can I give this idea? No. I was coming to this meeting and I was thinking about urban heat island effect. And in New York City, there's 5,000 acres of vacant spaces. Most of it is rooftop. Most of those roofs similar to what Oscar described, are small, inaccessible. They're not going to make sense for commercial farms. If somebody used their roof, this roof, to use this tool, they're going to find they're not going to make money with a tiny greenhouse. So what would be really interesting is if there was a similar tool. We could develop one like it later on, but something that had basically open source models for residents to convert their rooftops into projects that would reduce the heat island effect. So you could imagine actually a project that has only reusable materials on it, different kinds of pallets, different kinds of materials in the city, that the city could actually have locations to pick it up. And as long as you've chosen a model which fits for your rooftop, fits whatever the legal rules or the weight rules, so that people are safe, you could actually convert your rooftop into its own little kind of green space that reduces the heat on effect. It might not even need to grow food. Maybe it's just a place that just cools the building and cools the city. But if you make it low cost and if you democratize the models to do that, that could be interesting. So kind of like an open rooftop model website, farm model website.
Like a CSA-based design thing.
Yeah, like like if you've got, I mean, how big is this roof? This roof isn't that big, but like you're not gonna, you could grow some things on there.
Well, let's just look at the whole typology. Yeah. I mean, we always talk about rooftops. Of course, rooftops is a big factor, but
right.
There are facades, there are sidewalks, there are little, parks. There's tons and tons of typology in architecture where, you could create a new type of application for use. Huh? Let's say you do climate mitigation, so you have to have all the southern-facing facades. I mean, in Paris, they know that if you cover all the southern-facing facades, you reduce the overall heat by 2 degrees. Right. So there, you need to have a model to really actually implement that, because it's not so easy to have the facades green. Maintenance costs, they destroy the architecture, etc., etc. So,
and they do that for solar. You can take a rooftop and you can get the estimate.
Exactly.
Just. And right now this is just very, database focused, but I want it to be more visual. If we get more investment, if it goes well, we'll make it more visual, where you can actually look at a facade or look at a rooftop, and that'll help the user be more creative and more site specific. But we'll see how it goes.
What's about empty warehouses, factories?
Well, this would be great for that. This tool would be great for that. But I don't know what your question is about exactly. What is the effect on
Because if I look at Germany, how many companies are in the middle of the coal, steel, manufacturers have huge warehouses.
Right. Retail in the US is also suffering, like mini malls.
Yeah. I know a company who has 5,000 square meter roof, and they're trying to do something with photovoltaic. So instead of that, it would be green.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential to retrofit unused warehouses, many parts of the world, into farms, but the vertical farms are extremely expensive per square meter, and the operational best practices are still quite limited. There's not that many successful models. So I think we're still a little bit ways away, but that future is on the horizon. And retrofitting also is not always the most efficient way. These buildings do require specific insulation. You don't want any heat or any cold coming into the building. So sometimes the costs of retrofitting are higher than building a new building for a vertical farm when it comes to that kind of project. So I wish it was like, hey, we can turn them all into farms, but it's really much more difficult than that. But this would be able to answer that question for you. That customer could use this, answer that question, and save tens of thousands of dollars in consulting money, because they would answer the question in an hour.
The alternative is they do nothing with it. Need to be maintained. So,
well, I think again there could be a way to do it, and there are different. Maybe they decide to do something that doesn't have as many levels.
This is essentially the most important part to build up an actual planning tool. I mean, for any urban planning,
yes.
I mean, something like this will become a very important puzzle.
I hope so.
Piece, right? Because in a sense, yes, you want to map the whole thing first, and then you try to understand what goes where in the most intelligent way, and then you can strategic plan it.
Yeah.
Because that is also one of the challenges we have in urban agriculture. Is hard to find really any data about the whole thing. what is produced where, at what cost, and what are all the benefits, and still arguing about the social benefits, the climate benefits, etc. So all these things could be bundled in a fairly simple way to come up with a real, let's say it will need to have a comprehensive database, and it will need to grow in order to be accurate.
So that's how we see it. We think that food should be smart and data planning focused. This is a company called Remix. It has 300 city clients. And what these clients can do is the transportation departments can change different pathways for buses. They can put more bikes. They can do all of that, and they sell a subscription to cities. Why is this happening for food?
Yeah.
Right. It's actually a larger industry, and it's actually an industry that affects citizens at least as much, if not more. But there's no agriculture department for the city of Brussels that I'm aware of. I don't know if there is, but the city of New York doesn't have an agriculture department. So whose budget's going to pay for this? Who's going to pay for these tools? But that's what we're trying to build. This is where we're trying to go. We're trying to get ahead of it because we think that climate change is going to make it so urgent in the future.
But I think that the funding, first of all, I like your idea plan and build that is missing that too, right? Secondly, if you go to major cities, they're sitting there and have all urban competencies you can think in the world. They now having in one city in Germany, one street in Berlin, they have built apple trees. The apple is too big, concern of health issue, damage, and so on. So they take all these trees out and produce 30,000 euros for 15 trees. So you see, it's ignorance. Secondly, the payment or the budget cannot come anymore from the cities, they bankrupt. It must be the inhabitants. Right now,
the citizens.
Like if you go to Munich, you pay for a parking spot 50,000 euros. If you park it outside, it's 50. So there will be necessary changes if you live in an urban city.
Right.
But then you want to have quality. And I think when you have, like if you go to Dortmund or where the steel productions are, there are huge amount of empty, well-built town or factories. Change them into something where you can go in as a citizen.
Yeah.
Not only just food production, but it's really
other projects. Yeah.
So these kind of town architecture will have a bright future, but there is no model. You cannot go to a mayor and say, "Hey, great idea," and he says, "Wonderful," and
how do you do it?
Yeah. No figures, no data, no structure. And I think
that's what we're trying to do.
Having something where you can bring at least something to the table.
Yep.
That makes a difference. Ideas are plenty there. It stops exactly at the idea.
Yeah.
No plan.
And I think
it
can go hand in hand. That actually climate mitigation is increasing life quality and health. That is very directly linked. And then you bring in nutrition, then you have an even more argument for improvement of health and life.
What happens is if the city is getting empty, you can't have cars anymore.
Of course.
Everyone moves out. Like if you pay per square meter rent,
it's exactly the opposite is happening in reality.
A huge amount of 25 euros per square meter. You move out, and when you move out, then they build houses there. You destroy again non-green areas.
Yeah.
That will be in the next 10 years. I think we will have a rethink.
You
need to have a plan for it.
Yeah.
So I wanted to move on.
Yeah, sorry it took so long.
Schedule. No, it's okay. Nicole Thorpe has a presentation, and Nelly, I think you have something also, right? And
how do we do this?
Well, you can actually go on with the Zoom. Go on.
No, you can connect this to here.
Yes.
But Nicole, can you bring your presentation?
I think.
Are you still there, Nicole?
Yes, I'm still here. Sorry, I've just muted myself. Can you bring it up on your screen, Tom, rather than me sharing it? Because I think it might be easier.
If you share it, it'll be on there. We'll see.
You can do it. You can do the.
I've never done it with Zoom. My turn next.
Yes.
No.
Okay. Just bear with me. Call it up.
6. 6. 4.
This is the setup.
Capital J.
One of my biggest projects in Brussels.
Ooh, you can.
That's where.
4 windows.
Bathroom is upstairs, yes. Big K, just above, right here.
4 windows.
It's new construction, eh?
Yeah. One greenhouse here, small one, and a garden for all block on all rooftop.
Right. Excellent. Can you also go on to Zoom and then share this? I mean, have Nicole first, and then maybe Neil, and then maybe you show some stuff. Everybody shows.
Alex has some great examples. So.
Yeah.
Let me just.
Where's that project?
Complicated. I've got loads of things open. I've got to work out what to share. Sorry.
What was that? Sorry.
No, I'm just trying to work out how to do this on Zoom. Sorry, because there's.
You just click share screen at the bottom. You see here, this one.
Yeah. I'm just trying to work out. It doesn't find my presentation though. It gives me different options which one to go for, but then it doesn't say which one it is.
So if you go here and you just click desktop, it should show everything.
Oh, okay, I'll do desktop then. Okay.
Great that Henry's here. Sorry.
Oh, where?
I'm such a moron. I'm not used with Zoom. I mean, if we did this in Skype, it would be a lot easier. But
can you see it? Sorry.
Yeah.
Well, we see your desktop, but we don't see your presentation.
Okay. Well, that's not good. Hang on.
No, you need to start it somewhere.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Where is it? So if I go on desktop, what did you see then?
See your background.
It looks like you have 2 desktops. So that's probably the issue. So can you do this again and then try to look for the document?
Can you see anything now? Can you just call it up? I think this is taking too much time, Tom. Can you just call it up and then you share it? Because I seem to have 2 desktops and I have no idea how to get this just on one desktop.
You send it to me by mail, right?
I did, yeah. It's PDF, but I'll just have to ask you to switch then. I'll try again. So what do you see now?
You see a beautiful island in the ocean,
okay,
a rocky island.
That's nice. That's not the right one then. Because I can see I've got my presentation on here now. Henry?
Is it open already, your presentation?
It's open, yeah. I can see I've got my presentation right in front of me now. So
you need to be able to switch the screen, I think. That's what you need to do. But I don't know how that works.
Like the city, right? Circular city? Yeah.
Hang on, I'll try one last time and then.
I'm downloading your thing now.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you download and then open it, and then you can show your screen.
Okay, let me just see here.
Yeah.
Okay, I think this is.
Let's do it this way then. If I'll just have to ask you to switch then.
Yeah. And
never mind.
How did Henry get rid of the bar with all the people?
Just full screen?
I did full screen, but there's a bar. There's a way of actually. Hold on a second. Let me see here. What? Okay. Yeah, good. Good to go.
Okay.
Wait a minute. 2 people are missing.
Right?
Where's Miller? Miller went to the bathroom.
Okay.
Just one
second. Hold on for a sec then.
Okay, looks like we're
All right, let's start.
Yeah, okay. First of all, I think this was a really good introduction and a really cool tool, Henry, that you presented there. I think it's.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it's. I remember you saying when we last spoke that you're working on something like that, and I think it's a really neat idea. So yeah, well done, good job.
Thank you. It's the first version.
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be plenty iterations, but nevertheless. So I just wanted to give a brief overview of, not really an overview of what we do, but more something that I think is probably adding to this discussion a little bit. So I've named this supporting green infrastructure because that is basically what we do with our technology, with our monitoring and control technology. We want to support green infrastructure in delivering the ecosystem services that it's supposed to provide. So improving its efficiency as well as effectiveness and also its sustainability, because green infrastructure doesn't always just deliver benefits. There are also negative aspects sometimes, and I think this is just something that we need to bear in mind. So if you just move on to the next slide, please, Tom. Yeah. So I said at the beginning who we are and what we do, but nevertheless, just very quickly, we're basically an engineering and IT consultancy. We started back in 2011 in the UK. We opened an office in Munich in 2017. We originally started with green infrastructure, funnily enough. We started with monitoring and control solutions for green walls and living walls indoors and outside, and then we branched out into urban agriculture and arable agriculture as well. So not just urban, but also peri-urban and rural agriculture, so open field. Always providing data-driven and IoT, Internet of Things based monitoring and control solutions, designed and implemented according to our client specifications. So basically, we then drifted into the agriculture field, let's say, and then we started getting involved in a Horizon 2020 project called Crunch, which was Climate Resilient Urban Choices. The project is still running, and it's looking at the food, water, energy nexus within cities. And that was really the point where I personally thought to myself, I've really found my niche in terms of my fascination for these interconnections and interdependencies and various factors and drivers that impact on cities. And I just find it hugely fascinating, and I've become more and more involved in this area. But then obviously having worked in the agricultural sector as well, I've always had the tendency or the urge to try and combine the two. So this is part of the reason why I'm very excited to be party to this discussion today, because like I said at the introduction round, I'd like to bridge the gap somehow and draw the connection, and also educate the public that there is a connection between urban agriculture, green infrastructure, and all the challenges that we face. So basically, if you move on to the next slide, please. I think we can kind of skip that. There's just an overview of our market, so I already said that. So yeah, so I call this stress in the city because I think there are a number of stresses in the city, and heat stress is only one of them. But nevertheless, I thought we're talking about urban heat island effect, so I should focus on the heat stress. And one of my main concerns is human well-being. So I think we need healthy cities and healthy food systems in order to ensure our health and our well-being. So this has always been at the center of my mission and my company's mission, is to make cities, or contribute to making cities a better place, and contribute to improving the way that we produce and consume our food at the same time. So there are, I'd say, we all know that climate change is a driver for heat stress, as well as the urban heat island effect. What we've not mentioned really so far is that there are serious health problems. So one report published that just in the UK, they're expecting a 250% rise in heat-related deaths by the 2050s. So the heat stress is actually leading to premature deaths, or even some of them premature, obviously, and it's also impacting on workers' productivity. So it's also got an economic aspect as well, and also affects local retail, so local entrepreneurship and businesses. If it's too hot, people might not want to go into town, go shopping, and so we kind of focusing on open spaces. Nonetheless, the heat stress is exacerbated by other stressors. So if we're talking about air quality, for example, air pollution is one of the biggest environmental health threats, closely followed by noise pollution. So noise stress is a big stressor, with children and elderly obviously being particularly affected by all of these. So what I'm trying to get at is that yes, we're looking at heat stress, and we're looking at the urban heat island effect, which is driving the heat stress in cities. But at the same time, I think we should also consider the other multiple stressors on citizens, and avoid the silo thinking that we mentioned earlier, Tom. We should try and avoid that in this discussion as well. Kind of bear in mind that there are multiple factors that play together to make up the story. So if you could move to the next slide, please. So
Absolutely.
Yeah. So basically what I'm trying to say is we should be adopting an integrated approach and holistic approach to this discussion and to urban agriculture and urban green infrastructure in general. So people have been looking at various mitigation strategies. So we mentioned earlier rooftop greenhouses, we mentioned facade greening, we've got parks, you name them. I don't need to preach to the converted, you all know what these mitigation strategies are, but my question is, how effective are they? And how do we maximize the co-benefits of these measures? So again, I'm calling for a sort of bigger picture approach and more integrated approach. But I think we also need to bear in mind the priorities. So what are we designing the solution for? What is, in the given local context, what's the biggest problem and the biggest driver? Because even though I'm saying we should adopt a holistic picture, at the same time I'm realistic and realize that it's important to prioritize, and you can't have it all. So you need to, for example, if you design a green roof and your main driver is the cooling effect, then you might use certain technologies to retain more water, for example, in the substrate, and so on and so forth. You might choose a different substrate. Even if your main goal is carbon sequestration, you might use a certain plant type. I think you see what I'm getting at. So this is, to me, key, and this is the bridge to our technology. For me, it's key to monitor and evaluate and optimize the performance of the ecosystem services that we've chosen as a priority, but at the same time sort of build intelligence and use this. Yeah, thank you. that was intuitive, thanks. So basically using Internet of Things based monitoring and control technology to improve efficiencies. So I've put this is basically the IoT technology stack, which most people try and try and depict as a stack, so you know, from bottom to top. But I've depicted this as a circle, because to me it's also a feedback and optimization loop. So if we look at the top left where it says multiple parameters, this is just basically saying that we have a number of parameters that we can monitor. So for example, we have the air quality, we have plant parameters, we have microclimate parameters, but also human input data, so qualitative data that we can collect, and then push this data into the cloud. So basically connect the physical world with the virtual world, and this is where it all happens. So the storage, analytics, and artificial intelligence will visualize the data, and in that regard, it's really, really important to tell the story according to, which is basically a story that is fit for the stakeholder, so fit for whoever is the end user and whoever is reading the story in inverted commas, because we find a lot of the visualization or the way that data is communicated is not very user friendly, and most people can't make sense of the way that the data is being presented to them, especially if we're talking to Joe blogs, so the general public, the citizens, who I think are really, really important in being kept in the loop, pardon the pun, but being kept in the dialogue. So I think this is a really, really important point, and we always stress this when we work with our clients. And decision support. So I think, Henry, you mentioned it earlier, that all the data then obviously flows into decision support system. You've come up with a fantastic tool which is going that way as well. So offering decision support and making data available. And to me, again, this connects back to the physical world, because this is the point where if I find that my measures don't perform as well, I can then fine tune and reiterate. So the co-benefits of IoT, on the other hand, so I've just mentioned the performance monitoring of the ecosystem service provision and also the optimization, but we also mentioned earlier that financing is not always so easy. So it's not easy for local authorities, for example, to raise the funds. We mentioned this earlier. And I think through IoT and through data, we can build an evidence base and almost come up with a business case and financing case. We can optimize the sustainability, and importantly, like I just said, we can also engage the citizens. So by sharing data, we can almost justify or, well, yeah, inform the citizens of what their money has been spent on, and engage and involve them in that way. This is an example of a project which we're working on at the moment with Southend-on-Sea Borough Council in the UK. It's actually an Interreg funded project called Cool Towns, and the main topic is exactly our topic, so heat stress. What this project is doing, it's got a number of partners from, I think, Holland, Germany, and the UK, and one in France as well. And they have it. Sorry?
Is this London? Or where is that located physically? I mean, where is this?
Southend-on-Sea is close to London. Yeah.
Close to London.
It's about an hour's train journey from London, so it's just on the fringe of the Kita belt. Yeah, so they're part of this Interreg project, and we've been tasked with developing a bespoke air quality and heat stress monitoring system for them. So,
which Interreg project, if I may?
It's called Cool Towns. That's the name of the project.
It's Interreg.
But it's not an Interreg project, is it?
It's an Interreg project.
Okay, that is the name of the Interreg project?
Yeah, it's called Cool Towns.
Okay.
Sorry, I was in a bit of a rush because otherwise I would have put the link on, but I can put the link on the project. It was actually, I invited, Tom Gideon, who I invited, was the principal investigator.
Yeah. Oh, he's part of that. Okay.
He is the principal. He's the PI of Cool Towns. Yeah. So, but we're working basically with our UK partner, Southend-on-Sea Borough Council, and the overall project, Cool Towns, is looking to develop an integrated decision support system for planners, but mainly to assess the different measures of different mitigation measures for heat stress, with a focus on urban greening. And they are looking at co-benefits of that as well. So co-benefits in terms of air quality, biophilia, and benefits to biodiversity as well. But our remit, our briefing here was to focus on air quality and heat stress. So we've come up with a holistic view to air quality, because air quality does. I'm not a climate scientist, so this is where we could have really done with Gideon on board. But as far as I've understood, there is a link between air quality and the heat stress element and the urban heat island effect. And especially when we talk about heat stress, that's very much of a sort of perceived stress, and very subjective and personalized stress as well. So that may or may not be universal. So the way that this is measured is through so-called the various indicators. Again, I'm not an expert on this, but it's a globe temperature. So it's also the sort of the perceived temperature, which has to be measured at a certain height, which if it was on a rooftop, for example, this wouldn't impact people. So this is more down on the ground. And so we've come up with a way of marrying the air quality and so which impacts on the well-being of the citizens, as well as the heat stress, to try and work out what the actual perceived climate feeling is. And it's going to be very interesting because we're installing this before the intervention goes in. And then we were collecting baseline data for a number of months, and then the green infrastructure measures are going to go in. In this case, is going to be mainly trees, and the shading will then be assessed, and the impact on the air quality will be assessed, as well as the biophilic elements. So people are going to be able to give feedback on how they feel. Sort of subjective and qualitative data, which will be included in our data set and visualized and shared with the general public. So
that's great. I mean, this is really good news. I mean, I wasn't aware of this program. This is fantastic. And lucky us that we have you here.
Thank you.
The University of Bern also has quite a lot of very interesting things to say to this, because they were part of the study paper with ETH Switzerland, but all three of them could not make themselves available. And also Gideon from the University of Applied Science in Amsterdam, who's the coordinator for this project, he's not available. But we'll see this as a starting point. We have to kind of look at the roadmap, how we want to continue, if we want to really plan a real wider circle workshop, or how we think about this. But thanks so much.
Sorry, there are a number of people that I could, if I'd had more notice, I would have managed to get a few people on board. So maybe next time, if we're not quite so spontaneous, if we decide that the health element is something that we want to expand upon,
of course.
Then I can immediately think of a number of people who'd be very interested and interesting.
Yeah, well, we'll get to them.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Nicole. It's great.
Thank you.
All right, now let's switch to the Boerenbond.
I'll try to share.
If you,
yeah, you have to stop sharing, yes. Thomas.
I have to stop sharing.
You just push the red one at the top there. That red button at the top, yeah.
Okay.
So let's try this. Right.
Oh, I love the title.
Well, the first thing I want to say is this is a very easy title for a very complex issue. So, but you all know, it's not that easy. But that's
No, but
well, and then the production, of course.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Let's do this. And, so I will just have a short presentation. So we have some time left for the workshop. This is actually what my first introduction was. So we are Boerenbond is an organization of farmers supporting sustainable agriculture and horticulture. So it's partly creating networks, but at the same time connecting those ideas to government, research, and other industry partners. We are looking also, of course, to the new entrants in farming, and we see like two groups to make it just easy. Well, vertical farmers, or in general the urban farmers, and then more around the cities where they apply regenerative farming, so both out of soil and in soil. The last group is a very broad group because it's, of course, not only new farmers who are doing the regenerative. So on that part, we are still looking how to set up a network, also with the existing farmers connecting to the newcomers. But there are already a lot of partners working on the topic of soil, because soil is just the basis of agriculture. So, yeah, of life. So the topic is so broad, and we should get organized to have all the right people together, but still can do something. And if you're a big group, it's also difficult. It's a luxus, but it's a challenge to then actually make steps forward. A short introduction on what we're doing then with vertical farmers. We had a fun event in June where Henry was also present here in Brussels. And
super fun event.
Yeah, and I think everybody really enjoyed, because everybody felt it's like the first time we really meet each other, and we can chat and ask each other questions or on how things are going. So I really felt the need that they wanted to meet more often, like 2 or 3 times a year, not too often, but just discuss common issues. So this is like a wrap-up of the different companies at this moment. Let's say it's like 6 to 10 companies present in Flanders and Brussels. Mainly, I think there's one in Liège and Leuk also coming up. So it's still a small group. It's very diverse. I come to that. So I think the good thing is of setting up the network is that they can share data. Like we are in need of a lot of data. And then for this region, I think the companies are really looking to each other. What is everybody doing? What are they doing? What will I do from a business perspective, of course? But then at the same time, you see the diversity is very high. So what are we actually talking about if we're talking about vertical farming? We know it has a lot of opportunities, but how do we measure it? How do we explain that to governments, to consumers? Do we need a label? And then what is behind the label? So we have now already like students diving into the existing companies to look at the diversity and to think at the way of collecting data that could be useful for that diverse group of entrepreneurs. But also as a group, I think that it's important to have like some ambassadors who can speak also for the whole group. So they need to know each other first. And then the bigger idea is to create an equality accelerator. Do you remember, Henry?
Yes, we did talk about the quality accelerator.
Because, and maybe I go then into next slide. Here in Western Europe, and especially Flanders or Belgium, everything is quite near and accessible. So we are a small country, we have great food, but we have also a lot of different entrepreneurs, companies, all looking onto the subject of sustainable production. So in the first place, food entrepreneurs, where closing loops is like in the DNA of farming. Then we see a lot of food networks, like around Leuven, that's east from Brussels. We set up Generation Foods pre-incubator to stimulate young people to start a business in sustainable foods production, both the producers as people who are working with the fresh produce. We are recently became a part of the FarmTech Society, so that's also a very interesting platform to reach out to a lot of other partners looking on this topic. We had some contacts with Thought for Foods and then the AMI network. But then more general, in Western Europe, there is a lot of interest in circular economy as a whole. The incubator I started is very interested into that. We have programs from the government who is working on circularity. There is Capture Resources, a new knowledge center that is being built around Ghent that also collects the knowledge of different research institutes. We have, well, it's not we, but there is the Ellen MacArthur Foundation where there are links to. And then if we look again to the level of Belgium, we have a lot of good universities and research centers who are really close to the production. So not only the ideas, but really how does it work in reality. So that's really important. And then, of course, other companies also are like Open Crop Solutions who are providing then the equipment for it. As a big retailer started their own equipment for vertical farming. We have smart farmers. And then, of course, also policy is looking into this. So just to give an idea of the fields of the different partners, and that's, we feel like there's a big potential to connect all the dots, that we are a big group, so that's a challenge at the same time. But if we then think of cities, and everybody is talking about the circular cities, and often if I read the documents, I'm always surprised that there is so little or maybe no information on foods. Well, food production is like has the circularity in its DNA. And that's what we started thinking of. How come, with all those companies present, they are all closing loops? Can we add some, can we make a connection and use the knowledge that is already there to make the vertical farmers, for instance, but the urban farmers in general, and then also the rural farmers, can we make them look more circular? And in a way, with the idea that must create big opportunities for a city. So to bring the cloud, which is there with all the ideas, down to earth, we thought maybe we should just start looking for partners, ideas, speakers for a seminar. And this is also together with the Ornamental Plant Research Center, because before this job I worked for the ornamental tree growers, and there already the greening of the cities is also a big topic. And if we then think of green rooftop gardens, the techniques I think might look the same. And so you have substrate, you have plants. So by bringing together both the knowledge on greening the cities through edible production and ornamental production, and then look onto all bring it together, and then look on circular opportunities. What will that bring us? So we're thinking of organizing a seminar early 2021. We have just a one-pager. We are now talking to a lot of people, also architects like the Brussels Architecture Workroom, Alex, you might know them. They were all also very interested. What we want to do there is not to convince people that there is an opportunity. We really want to reach the people who are convinced and who want to start working on this by bringing together practical examples, a practical showcase by how to do it. We are doers. We think a lot, but we are then a bit becoming impatient, and then we ask, but how can we do it? So that is really the question we want to answer, or a first step into that direction. And then of course it's not only the cooling, it's like Nicole explained, there are different potential good things coming out of local food production or plants. And then I was also very happy with the tool that Henry just presented, because yeah, we are really in need of good data to know what is actually working on what topic. Because to be honest, it's very difficult to just fill all the boxes that is mentioned there and still have a business or something.
Yeah.
So
it's always a trade-off.
It's always a trade-off. But if you know what you want to do and you can explain it,
you can narrow it down.
Then it's clear. Because now often we see that we might do all the things, but we can prove it. But we want to sell, and actually there's a lack of data. So great. I think well, you were already on my list, so but now for sure. So one day we were thinking on-site, on the research center itself, kind of seminar, maybe also workshops and then promotion booths. But then the second day would be some visits to projects in Brussels, Antwerp, Ghent. And then to conclude, yeah, the audience we were looking at is urban planners, architects, real estate companies, urban farmers, buyers, project developers. So actually the doer side of the spectrum. I think that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, the policymakers are missing in that list. Huh? I mean, you have the title, but they're not.
The actual one.
They are welcome. Okay.
Well, they're not only welcome; we need them. Huh?
Yeah,
they need us in some ways. I mean, I think one of the big question I always face is that agriculture is such a regulated industry that all of a sudden you're in this completely free-falling space when you go out of the conventional agriculture into these new types of innovation where there is completely no regulation. I mean, we have to be aware that a lot of these innovation in urban agriculture do not have any framework of any sort. Huh? I mean, I'm talking about, issues like pest control in a vertical farm does not exist. Huh? If you use baking powder to fight something on your vertical farm, you basically lose an illegal substance, huh? Because it's not regulated, because there's no process yet in place to really understand what is this new method, how does this method work out, what are the best practices, and so forth. So we're really in a beginning point, and of course these kind of topics are very complex, and as you said, it's a multi-layer cake, as we call it. And the urban heat effects is an interesting thing, also from a policymaker point of view, because that is like on the top of the list of every mayor of every substantial cities. And as we've seen also within the policy maker arena, mayors have become kind of like almost a kind of like enfant terrible. They start making things their own way. I mean, the mayor of Paris is a perfect example of being elected and making a promise of creating 300 hectares of food production within the city limits of Paris. That is absolutely amazing that we do
30 food, 300 green.
30?
30 of it will be food and 300 is
300 for greening, yes.
Not creating, having a vote, there's already some green.
Of course, there is.
Achieving a total of 300.
Yeah.
New, added to the existing. Yeah. Oscar, do you have something to say about all this? Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I don't know if any of you saw that video recently that a friend of mine made. It was the one with Greta Thunberg and George Monbiot talking about how planting trees was the big kind of objective of all of this.
What kind of trees?
Just any kind of trees, really. The whole idea is.
I didn't see that.
So it was one of these very well received kind of media cycle videos. Everyone should grow trees because Greta Thunberg and George Monbiot said so. But the key point is crucial, which is that we know that the most effective way to mitigate urban heat island, and just to mitigate sort of general temperature rises is to plant trees. Now, if that's the kind of thrust of how we mitigate all these, climate change and all the rest of it, the question we need to ask is, what role does urban farming play within that? And I've always thought of it as a substitution effect. But at the moment, it seems that we're thinking about urban farming in a bit of an isolated way, and that we're not pinning it to the other activity, which is about, not only urban greening, but all greening.
Right.
So there's tech billionaire I once met called Bill Yao, and he runs something called the Billion Trees.
Right.
And so, sorry, it's We Forest. And I mean, this guy's quite funny. He's a classic billionaire, just very quite brutal. But it's brutal in a good way, because his whole shtick is that we just need to plant trees wherever the hell we can plant them. And he's right in that sense. But he says it's also extremely difficult. Now, a lot of the factors that sort of go against that are quite diverse. I mean, they can be anything from NIMBYism, not in my backyardism, to cultural issues. But a lot of the time, it's well, we need that land for raising cattle, or raising or growing something else within the sort of framework of industrial agriculture. So, in effect, like the whole endeavor of urban farming is actually one that's going to have to face up to a bit of a battle. And again, that's why we kind of need the coherent sort of, behavior change, as well as the technological shift, as well as the kind of geographical and the architectural and the kind of the mechanical shifts. So I guess I'd also, but add to this that if we're talking about, urban heat island mitigation, as we've said before, the most interesting models for this particular problem are the ones that combine the soil base, the open air, the diversity of plants, and then do so in a way that can also contribute to shifting behavior change patterns and eating patterns. Sorry. If you can do that, then that's great, because then you start to attack industrial agriculture and their dominance. And as has been spoken about already, if we're talking about the changing demographic of demand, particularly millennials who want to know where their food comes from, want to be confident that it's not full of nasties, well, that's incredibly powerful. And the only way, and one of the benefits that we have within the urban farming thing is that you can meet your farmer, because they're local and they're nearby. So I think if we're framing, how does urban farming contribute to mitigating urban heat island, I think we need to understand it within a much wider effort. It's not just citywide, it's almost, in that respect, it's kind of global. It's the kind of thing that I imagine Dixon de Pommier has nightmares about at night. Does that make sense to anyone?
Yeah. I mean, my question always was that, I see, we have these knowledge silos. We have the urban planners, we have the architects, we have the engineers, and then we have the farmers and the agriculture practitioners. And in all this, I mean, there are certain good examples of, let's take the renewable energy sector with solar panels or whatever, where there's become like a really interesting and good, well-versed, let's say, a channel of feeding all this knowledge in to create a planning and then building something. And I think that this is one, from a perspective of urban agriculture, a big problem, because, number one, you don't really know as an urban agriculture practitioner how to fit into a planning process of a city of any given size or scale, not to mention even a building. And there is, I always find really interesting also the topology of our architecture is something the agriculture community cannot do anything with, because they normally used on very pragmatic, simple agriculture economy buildings, whether they are farm buildings out in the open. And as soon as you enter into a more complex environment, in classic cases, for instance, greenhouse construction companies, they do not want to go into urban agriculture because it is, to their liking, much too complicated to plant something like a greenhouse in an urban setting. It requires a completely new set of planning tools and a new understanding of how to integrate this. And there may be a new subspecies of architects who actually will be more familiar with the agriculture practitioners' ideas and can actually tie this together. And I even think now the whole purpose of my ranting about this is that we really actually have to go to the rural agriculture communities to learn how to actually mitigate a large-scale greening of any sort.
I mean,
but how do we do this? I mean, urban agriculture is not viewed as a very attractive proposition to the rural agriculture.
I think agroforestry is the way you do it. And you can have
that's a very
you can have both. You can have, and this is something that I've recently got interested in as I've moved further and further away from Dixon to Pommier. Oscar.
yeah.
But there's an organization called the Renature Foundation. They're part of Thought for Food. They've become really good friends of mine, and Felipe and I have a lot of shared vision. And we're going to be working with them to take agroforestry and add it to the tool that I just demonstrated. But agroforestry, having seen it more and more in person, is pretty incredible. You can produce short-term crops like leafy greens while simultaneously growing trees. You make some sacrifices on the total yield of that, but what you get long-term is the benefits you mentioned, but also restoration of the soil in a different way, and you can grow a lot more variety of crops. So it's really appealing. I think there needs to be new models for it to work in urban areas and temperate regions. It's mostly tropical in its application. But I think those could be developed. I think there could be some really interesting living labs, research centers, universities that could get involved with that. Jean Blou could do really good work with agroforestry. I think they are looking to do some permaculture research. So bringing that into there would be really interesting. But the problem there again with trees is just it's a long-term commitment. It has that benefit, but the farmers need that cash flow early on. That's why greenhouses, that's why vertical farms are so attractive in a lot of ways. So you don't get the benefits of agroforestry until you're 5 and 6.
I know there are developments that dwarf tree breeding is really taking on big in let's say the food industry, and I could see maybe there are some benefits brought over into urban agroforestry. However, I also want to introduce here Alexander. He just shared a picture with me of a project in Brussels, and it'd be very interesting to see how that planning process happened, where there are integrative green infrastructure with agriculture planned.
Yeah.
So this is also a quick intro to à l'aube.
À l'aube in French is when you are next to something new, and it means Alexandre Lefebvre, Agriculture Urbaine Belgique. I'm sorry about my bad English, but I will try to be good. I'm doing quite the same job than Henri, but in Belgium and especially in Brussels. But I also doing some consulting outside of the country. I have more than 60 projects that I can explain what I do with them. And it's very different companies, cities, and architecture, business, etc. This is one of my smallest projects, only doing some information about urban farming in the city, next to a big building in construction, and with an artist to bring some nature and beauty in the city during the construction of the new building. It was very Cool. And this is one of the biggest area where I work. It's about the strategy good food. It's the strategy for the ecological alimentation, ecological food for Brussels.
This is very unique. I don't think any city has something like this, not even Paris.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yeah, I think Milano have a strategy like this.
Yeah, they have
not the same one, but something like this.
I was very impressed by this one.
And I did this work when I was an assistant in Jean-Loup in the university. I am also a beekeeper. Henri know that. And now I have more than 2 billion bees in Brussels. Here is on the map 36 bee hives on the city and next to the city. That's not the subject. Also, I'm doing also some B2C with honey and the beers because I'm also growing hops. And I can share you some beer, but only with people is here, of course.
Nice.
No virtual beer.
I have a Greta Thunberg with me.
Oh, really? Okay.
This beer.
Okay, cool.
I'm also building ABO. It's the Association of Professional Urban Agriculture in Brussels, but also in Belgium. And AFO, the same association in France, helped me to do that. Let's talk about EATS and urban farming. I will talk about the project that Thomas explained to you. But first, I think one thing is important. It's like in the history of the development of urban farming, all the crises like the war, but like other many crises, was at the start of the development of a massive urban farming in the city. And I think it's a good way to talk about urban farming and climate. We are a lot of many different big problems, big issues about climate, and urban farming can help, not solve the problem, but help. And it's better to be resilient before the problem than doing victory gardens when the war is there. And especially today, because we talk a lot about that, the knowledge is nowhere in the city. It's why I have job, because nobody know even how to grow a zucchini. But it's very simple, but even that I have to explain that to my clients. They don't understand the difference between the flowers of zucchini or for sunflower, because they don't know the nature. I think it's very important to increase urban farming in all cities for this resilience. Not only to fight the heat on the city, but also to be more resilient with the knowledge. And the tools of Henri is very good for that. Now, a very big project where I work, one of my first projects when I was in the university. This is the 3D plan with very cool solar panel without color, but this is only from the view from the architect. Because after this is the project in the truth.
This is how it looks real.
It is next to Tour Taxi, and it is 400 apartments with the best practice to the construction. All the green zone, it's some rooftop garden, and the big one, I don't know if you can see my here. The big one is a greenhouse.
Actual greenhouse on the roof. Huh?
Yeah, this is one of the most sustainable building in the world because they have one of the best score on the BREEAM certification.
Oh, okay.
and this is my job. This is the solution to do the urban farming on the rooftop on each building for each block of the small neighborhoods on the rooftop.
Can you talk about the planning of this? Because that you obviously you were part of this from the beginning.
Yeah, it was on maybe 2017 the start, when I have these pictures of this one with 3D, and we help architects. And this is the picture of maybe this year. It's very quick, maybe 2 or 3 years to build this. And now we have a company that helped the people to grow in this system. But you see not yet the vegetables, because this picture is from this holidays, this this summer. But you know, all the garden was ready before the people goes in the building. It's very unique. It's very often the opposite. We build the building after we think about urban farming, but the cost is very high because it's a little bit too late for this small project, small garden. But because they think about this very earlier, they built the garde corps, something for security to don't fall from the building. They think about something to put the tools.
Storage.
Yes, the compost, also not only urban farming, but also place to live. And we think all about that.
This is accessible for all the tenants. Huh? This is also expected that they are participating in this.
This is the greenhouse, very nice one, very integrated in the building. And this is the aeration, ventilation.
Right.
And they use this system to take the air from the building inside the greenhouse or not.
Okay.
If that smell not good, or and
smell.
you can with this system you can use the heat from the building to warm up the greenhouse, and you can also use a little bit of CO2. It's not very important for the climate at these scales, but it's something. You know, it's also something to explain to the kindergarten, to make children for the pedagogy.
Was the idea here already to do some mitigation on the urban heat island?
Yeah.
In consideration when they were planning this, was that a topic, or was just the agriculture community sense?
No, the topic was wind farms for the BREEAM certification.
And in BREEAM, is there any mitigation for the climate in there? Is that a criteria or not?
No,
I don't know.
Probably not.
What is it?
It's like LEED, it's a kind of certification for buildings.
Yeah.
And is that done after construction or just based on time?
It's
certified after.
It's more than after, but you have to plan before, because you can.
I mean, it looks at energy. You need to be, energy neutral. I think the idea. That's why there's solar panels on it.
There was a story of a lot of these buildings that they are foreseen to be super efficient, and then there are plenty of failures in the construction, or skills of the builders are not sufficient, and there are thermal bridges everywhere, and in the end they're not passive at all.
And it's the same problem for urban farming. They put a lot of green on the building, very often, the architects, but they don't know how to do it after the 3D effect, like this.
Exploiting the greenhouse.
A small company. The name is Sky Farms. They put.
It's a commercial project.
No, only the company that helps citizens to grow,
to teach them.
to teach them.
Okay.
This is a commercial project, and they use this greenhouse to produce some plants for the gardens in the city, not only on Tivoli. It's a small pépinière.
Nursery.
Nursery, yes, it's a small nursery. And
There you have the solar panels and you have the grass underneath,
Yeah.
which is something we do in the rural areas.
Yeah.
Even with some pasture land, and you can have sheep
Grazing underneath, yeah.
grazing underneath the solar panels. Yeah. But there, the grass didn't end up in the building.
this is
It's just stony,
the pictures.
white stony.
They use gravel, huh?
And the other one where you see the.
Yeah, he
Before,
probably was a
you.
it probably was a nice idea, but they realized that the maintenance of the grass cutting underneath the panels is not going to.
I think
So this is probably very efficient in energy, which is already something. So in Brussels, they're struggling.
Yeah.
But in terms of heat island, I'm not sure it's making.
I don't think so.
no, because too many solar panel and black solar panel.
Yes.
And I can explain that in French because it's very complicated. But, ouais. Donc, à la base, le projet c'était de faire des panneaux solaires transparents, c'est-à-dire que seules les cellules photovoltaïques étaient noires, mais toute la structure laissait passer, ça existe. Mais c'est moins productif et il fallait un peu plus espacer les panneaux solaires. Et en plus, la toiture verte a un effet sur les îlots de chaleur à l'échelle micro sur la toiture et ça améliore le rendement des panneaux solaires. Tu comprends?
Quand c'est transparent ou non?
Même quand c'est noir. Il y a des études qui ont été faites, je pense, par l'université en Israël, sur le fait que les green roof can improve the solar panel.
Yeah, there's other actually,
because of the heat effect.
Yeah, New York City did the same thing, and they did, I think, 60 different kinds of solar configurations on Roosevelt Island. And that research, I think, is public as well, and it's better with greenery. That was the top performing one. Higher capital cost, but much better performance of the building
and even the energy output on the panels.
The solar panels perform better when they stay cool.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, of course, when they get too hot.
Yeah. So it helps them perform better. It also provides the additional green infrastructure benefits, and the greenery does provide some cooling. There's even some projects that are outdoor agriculture is doing it now with solar panels, where they have sheep and some production with solar panels. Sorry. I missed that.
Yeah.
And
chickens.
What?
Yeah, this greenery needs maintenance.
The maintenance is probably up there. It was too much of a cost.
So
I think.
Watering.
Water too.
With the sort of summers that we have, even in Brussels.
You have to automate it, but you could have.
Yeah, you need to irrigate it. Yeah.
There's additional costs, certainly.
Yeah.
And
Are there efforts made to capture water?
yes,
This is now in the new.
Yeah, it's the
comment. The regional urbanism regulation has been changed.
And on this building is very high.
Yeah, well, so
level.
it's extra.
They use rainwater for the
rainwater
for all the stuff that can use it, like
all the grey water, wash machine, shower, and the kitchen,
and also the rooftop,
the kitchen,
and the greenhouse.
So this was completed in 2019, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, so the planning probably started what?
You can
5 years ago.
Yeah. And it's not very complete, Yeah.
Still there, still going on, huh? Okay, it's not fully occupied. It's not occupied yet. Okay.
Yes,
it is
occupied. Not
100%.
Yeah.
So next summer it will be fully operational.
Yes.
Well, this is very interesting. I didn't know this. So we have 420, if I see correctly. Now, of course, how do we do a roadmap out of this? Huh? My idea was anyway to have this as an initial discussion point, and then really schedule an actual workshop, prepare the workshop well, and get the real stakeholder participation. Because the climate people are missing. Obviously, we have, thanks to Oscar, we have somebody here from the construction or real estate side or agriculture side is represented. What do you think, Alexa? What would be interesting from your perspective to see this as a working group going forward informally, or would it make sense to make a formalized idea out of this? I mean, obviously, we're not the only ones. We can actually,
just on the heat island aspect.
Yes, the heat. No, I just want to stick to the heat island aspect.
We've been discussing.
The reason for that is
sustainability in general.
Yeah. I think that ultimately the heat island effect will cover a lot of the topics we have anyway.
Because what my plenty of immediate reactions, learning a lot first. So, but I think it's good to have a group that can raise data and questions and just bring the group together. Policy-wise, this is much wider than farming. It's more about climate. It's about spatial planning. It's about energy and what we can see also with all the trade-offs. And it seems what's on fashion or developing very well is this vertical, or seen as promising, the vertical farming in the greenhouses or in the rooftop. And in the discussion, we're saying, well, for the heat island effects, that's not really what's needed. Maybe what would be needed is not to build anything and just keep the soil and have a farm in the middle of the city in this towards taxi places. So that could be something. But this comes across the trend or what people do business-wise. So that's something that, as a group, you could address.
Right.
How you see these trade-offs and
look at the use case
of the soil. If you talk heat island, it's a full soil system that you need, but your demand from your clients is more about the other two things. And so you start with this because you also need to keep it up. So this I think is you're touching a topic which is very complex with multiple trade-offs, and how do you approach this as consultants or as a farming organization or as so then I'm not in any position to recommend you any sort of action for Horizon, for what's coming up under Horizon Europe. I think the topic is interesting for several parts. For the cluster on food, bioeconomy, natural resources, agriculture, and the environment. This is interesting for several intervention areas. We are going to do something on urban farming, but based on that, on the reflection that will come from this coordination and support action that is in the call for applications for January. So this call that we
FNR.
review, the FNR 3, natural resources 3. Right. Where it's typically the sort of questions that we have, that okay, we haven't done a lot on this because resources are scarce and in farming we have enough problems or things to solve already with but we want to do more on this, but there's been no project that were quite techy on the technological side of things, vertical farming. Okay, there's interest in this, and then we've had the cost action on urban agriculture Europe, which is investigating more the business models and the social aspects, and okay, so there's a social community and there's a techie community. We haven't talked to each other too much for the moment. We would like people to come together and have this dialogue to build really a research and innovation agenda on this sense. I took note of a lot of questions that could feed into a roadmap on this, because we build roadmaps also.
Right.
So that can be good. But I think that equals also to what's being prepared on the missions. So on the Horizon Europe, we're going to have big pockets of resources targeted to achieving a certain goal. And there's one on climate adaptation. and there's one on soil health.
Right.
It's called Soil Health and Food as a mission area. The exact mission hasn't been decided yet, so what we want to achieve by 2030, 40, 50. But it's about soil health, and we're talking a lot about it today because it's World Soil Day. So if you go on Twitter,
that's right. That's right. That's right.
And so a lot is about soil, especially if you combine urban farming and the cooling effect, heat island effects. It's all about how we manage the soil, and in the way we approach the Secretariat for the Soil Mission is a DG Agri. The way we approach this, like, okay, the spatial planners are also a target group for this mission. It's also the soil in the urban areas, or only in the rural areas. But part of the decision to make is to protect it, not to build on it. And so that one of my immediate reactions also in the breaking silo thing, so we are in a very urban discussion here. But one question is, do we stop piling in people in cities at some point? Piling people in cities.
Right.
So there's a whole discussion on the rural development and the rural attractiveness as well, which is well, in the Green Deal that will be announced next week. Part of the Green Deal initiative of the new Commission is also includes a long-term vision for rural areas.
Right.
So there's a need also to be balanced. A lot of people want to live in the cities and they should be able to, but some would like to live somewhere else and they're not able to because the jobs are not decent enough or connectivity is not enough.
Right.
So you could partly solve the problem by not just mitigating urbanization, actually slowing down urbanization and giving the possibility of everyone to live where they would want to live, which is not the case now. And we can see from the whole political context.
Maybe that's the case now in Flanders, but I must say that it puts a lot of pressure on the open area because people are, like you say, just living. Well, yeah, but it's been history, but it has been a long period of people who could build a house anywhere. So you have a very, it's spread out over the place. So it's an interesting question, filing up people, but at the same time, if we are growing more people and we are not filing them up, not literally, but by idea. Where will they live? Will they then just spread out and then?
But on this, I'd like to make just one point that Flanders, the Netherlands, is a very specific situation. Rural areas almost don't exist anymore. In the OECD faculty, there are most rural areas. There's a very specific, but there's a very specific approach to this where the rural land needs to be protected from also urban sprawl and all of this. So that's in this area. I completely agree that's the problem. If you go to the suburbs, the surroundings of Madrid and the España Vecina and territories that are completely empty to the point that the farmers will not stay. So
they move out.
They move out. Nobody will grow that food in the rural area, in many of the rural area, people are just going away because they don't have services, don't have internet, the schools are closed, no doctors, no maternity. It's all emptiness. So it's not the case in Flanders at all, but in many different territories. So that's why, again, there's a lot of diversity on how to approach this. And the key is not on urban or rural, but in the partnership and how we renew this contract between territorial approaches. And we have nice projects running on this also, urban rural partnerships. It's called Robust, and they have one of their topics is on sustainable food systems. So it's on to Robust, but their website is ruralurban.eu.
I mean, that's why I find.
And they have living ads in different areas. Some that are metropolitan areas, which is one case. We've heard a lot about very big cities this afternoon, but.
There's a lot
because that idea,
most of the people live in second-tier cities. What's the case there? And
we also support that idea because our rural, semi-rural farmers are also struggling, but they can learn from the business models from the newcomers.
This idea.
So the rural-urban, that's anyway also an issue that's very present.
And I think there's a lot there in renewing also the relationships and the governance and just making it possible for people to live where they want. And then, the land resource has to be managed in the rural areas too. If everybody knows the house with a big terrace and the swimming pool, it's good as well.
I mean, one of the negative outcomes of these rural developments is that it ends up sprawl. Huh? I mean, this is something the U.S. has encountered all over the place, no planning, and then it actually creates a really long-term infrastructure problem. And how do you reverse that in areas where you have that? And then the second thing is also.
But you have to protect because the big cities they were founded also where the land was good.
Yeah, of course, the fertile land is where.
And then this good land has been. Paris.
Yeah.
Paris Basin is where you have the beaches.
All the
most
urban.
of it is gone. So that's why there's a reflection to have on the model, on the settlement model that we want to have. If we want big metropolitan areas, huge ones, or even polycentricity that we still have in Europe, and we could still nurture and build this in other continents. It's largely lost. But in Europe, we still have that choice. So there's really a reflection on the territorial type of settlement that we want to have, with some challenges to be solved in the urban areas of renaturing, some challenges to be built to be addressed in the rural territories, and depending on very remote versus close to urban, or small cities, big cities. So you need a diversity of approaches. This no one size fits all.
That's exactly what I wanted to aim at, huh? Because the urban heat island effect is affecting every city completely differently. This is also an interesting aspect to really look at, because when we look at the more drier regions, then you have a serious, massive problem to solve. Actually, up here in Northern Europe, it's a much more manageable problem in a sense, because we do have the ability. Because it is actually not always as hot as it continuously is. Not today for sure. However, the complexity of the topic is, of course, in itself a bit challenging. Although I find it that it could be a unifying kind of methodology behind it too. Is an urban heat island effect also now concerning the surrounding rural populations? Yes. And so therefore you could really also make an argument that we actually need to really talk not only agriculture, talk health benefits for everybody in both scenarios. And also, of course, the food supply. Yeah? I mean, how rural agriculture is going to produce the food in the future. It has largely to do how we're going to manage the urban heat island effect. And that's what I think is a really good hinge on these cross-sectorial, silos. However, how are we going to do this? I would say we would look at this as a working group right now and kind of like manifest a bit more stakeholder work. I mean, I definitely want the client scientists on the table. Definitely need more representation from the rural agriculture side as well, from the urban agriculture. I mean, we have no problem to manifest a lot of interest from urban agriculture, because they are also very interested in this topic naturally. Because Copacogena, yes.
It's too among urban elements, to urban farming in general.
I must stop. I'm not aware of other organizations having experts in urban farming, but I can answer it.
So it's very largely in Europe, a nation. Nation network. So you are Alexandre in associations. Are there so many other countries? Is there any plans for a European version of this? Do you know of an established network on urban farming at European level?
It's FarmTech Society.
FarmTech Society,
That's what we're trying to do. Yes.
Okay.
That's the one.
But there are quite a lot of regional organizations now. UK has UK UAT, as Mark Kohler.
France has one.
Belgium one. The Netherlands is a new one formed also this year called Catapult. In Germany, I know of several regions who are also farming. So I think within a short period we are having probably a better map of what this is all about.
I think it'd be really interesting to pick. I don't know, where is the heat island effect absolutely the worst in Europe, and then I don't know. We might be interested in customizing the model to bring in data from other sources. So if there's researchers that want to contribute the kinds of rooftop uses or vacant space uses that would cool, then we could do it on a neighborhood. We could model it. And then we could use the facilitation tools of FarmTech Society to actually get and what Alex does and some of what we do as well, to get the farmers to actually submit ideas and mimic the Paris model and say, okay, 5 years later, was it cooler? If that's exciting, if that's where we want to spend our energy. But that's how, that would be kind of a living lab for urban agriculture and reducing heat up. So using a data-driven approach, citizen engagement, and entrepreneurship.
Okay. I think in Brussels is a really interesting location.
Well, there's a lot happening. It's true. You could look
But
at
it has good strategy, and
That's true.
the Department of Economy, which covers agriculture in Brussels.
Is there like an old person neighborhood in Brussels where all the old people live, or most of the older people, since it affects them the most?
The southern parts of Brussels, or maybe.
Oh, they are almost everywhere. I mean, you can't.
Because it'd be really interesting to study, like, how do they shop in the summertime? How long is their journey to go to the store? And what are the effects of heat out on their health? It may prevent economic benefits, may prevent them being active in the summer, may actually affect their health. Is there a year where there was a heat wave that affected that population? Because if you can,
We had it last 2 summers. I mean, if you talk to senior citizens,
I'm sure you would know. That's why I'm asking the questions. I'm sure you know, but I think that's the kind of case study that would go quite. Yeah. So
But it was exceptional. So you had
right
summers where it was 14 degrees.
So it'd be really interesting to look at a number of things, effects on the hospitals, effects on the various impacts, and looking at that would be really interesting. You could probably do a lot of work in just a 2-day workshop on that if you found the right location.
Yeah. And actually, what I wanted to say about Brussels, it's right when you say that's very unique, maybe in Europe, that it's so dense. So in a way, all the farmers around Brussels are urban farmers too. They don't see it like that, but they are very near. So this is maybe a little bit in advance to other cities where the farmers are more further away. And so
everywhere they are.
Well, but here they are really involved. The government of Brussels is looking also to the provinces north and south, so Flemish and Walloon region of Brabant. So both provinces, they are looking into the farmers there to say, hey, we will produce for the city. So they are economically activated, and they see the urge, and even our organization says we have someone paid for that to look at the subject. So I think that's really unique in the Dubai Project network. But therefore, Brussels is a really interesting city and surrounding to investigate. Could that be a living lab where that can be tested?
That'd be great.
Yeah, I would, Brussels lends itself obviously also to do out of logistics reasons to kind of do this. And then see how, well, not for New York, but
hey, twice in 1 year, that's pretty good.
Yes.
That's far.
All right. I'll try to compile this material a bit and facilitate a kind of a summary, and then any other, did we miss obviously always a lot of things, but the main just is really to try to figure out if this is indeed the topic which could be a provider for this break open of these silos. That's how I personally think. Is that a wishful dreaming? Is unrealistic, or
well, I mean,
what is your response?
My advice, the FarmTech Society's mandate and the potential benefits of urban agriculture are quite widespread, and there are trade-offs, right? So my advice would be to run a series of these on those related topics. You could do one focused on health and obesity. Right. You could do one focused on entrepreneurship. Right. And gather that information that then formulates topic areas that are listed on the website. And then, you have to make a decision about where the best ways to invest moving forward. But I think it's about creating the pillars of impact that the society can have by bringing together interested and knowledgeable people like yourselves to talk about these topics. and share some information, because this may be this is one of many. This may be the best one, or it may not be the best one. And the fact is, you can't do all of them.
Yeah.
None of us can. So I like the idea. I mean, as I said, I had some ideas about the neighborhood scale and the case study. I could see how agriculture would contribute to it. But for us, we would go through the same process. We'd say, well, you know, longer term, is this the thing that's going to make urban agriculture blow up, right? Is this the thing that's going to make it policy move in that direction so actively, or is it something else? Is it health? Is it entrepreneurship? Is it resilience? Just, you know, loss in our food system. And so I think we'll make that decision ourselves as well before we invest time in contributing. So you need to make that decision and make that case to anybody you're inviting.
Right, of course.
If I may, there is one example of a climate kick project that essentially tried to do that, to do like the address urban heat island, turn it into a kind of issue, which then became a product that then cities could buy into. It was called the Blue-Green Dream. I don't know if anyone's come across this. Anyone?
Climate kick?
So,
I think it's part of the EIT, European Institute of Technology.
I haven't heard of that one.
So
It means knowledge and innovation communities.
Heard of KIC, but I haven't heard of that one.
Yeah. So it was Blue-Green Dream. It was set up by Professor Chado Maximovich, who was based at Imperial College. The blue and the green refer to blue and green, like the combination of blue and green infrastructures within the city. It ran various kind of trials looking at ambient temperature changes, like from, you know, greening of rooftops. At one point, I met him at a Thames Tideway morning breakfast meeting, presentation, and we got talking, and then I told him about the sort of agritecture and the movement, and he was like, "Oh, okay, well that fits in generally with what we're trying to do." Now, bear in mind that this project was funded to the tune of about 3.6 million euros, I believe, and I hate to say it, but it didn't really go anywhere. It sort of had a fair bit of buy-in from a number. I mean, it had a lot of very good photographs of people with branded T-shirts, and we believe in the blue-green dream. But in terms of turning it into something that was product-based, monetizable, service-based, it's quite difficult to kind of monetize solutions to urban heat island. I mean, I hate to sound morbid, but if you were going to do it anyway, you'd do it where the most number of people die because of extremes in weather volatility. So that might be the south of Spain, where, every time the temperatures go to, 40, 50, if they ever go to 50, you get a certain number of people every year who die because it's just too much to deal with. Then if you're going to sort of try and then sort of figure out what role urban farming might play within that discourse, it's pretty massive. Hence why I was saying before, if you were to link it to something that is actually doable, which is planting trees, like for example Ecosia, the alternative to Google, that rather than hoard money in the Cayman Islands, decides to spend its profits on planting trees. Anything that has planting trees at the end is dealing with urban heat island in some sort of way. And then there's the whole issue of then there's the other kind of products and services that can come out of that, which is how you redirect agricultural subsidies to forest owners who maintain their forests, and how that works within the carbon offsetting market. But even I'm already starting to get confused, because this is all very massive stuff. It's very hard to pin down something where you say, okay, urban agriculture can definitely affect that particular market very clearly with a consequential effect on urban heat island. Now, if you can find a nice, neat, explicable relationship then you go from a working group to a spin-off.
Right. Yeah, I hear you. That's interesting.
Sorry, can I just say something? I think we said that we'd focus on the urban heat island, but I still think that it would be beneficial to maybe link it to something like air quality, which is a big thing at the moment. So just for purely marketing point of view and trying to raise awareness and gain traction, I think linking it to air quality would give it a bit more oomph.
Which again, planting more trees is at the center of it all. I mean, ultimately, what's hilarious is that all of our problems are literally going to be solved by planting more trees. And that's, I mean, it sounds facile, but it just seems to be the only thing that we know that works. But the problem is that you don't get the immediate gratifying hit from planting more trees. It takes time for that whole system to mature, so therefore you don't get that kind of consumerist buzz that you get when you buy something and use it for the first time. Hence why we're not planting enough trees. But yeah, I mean, look, I guess the question for me is like, if it's air quality, if it's urban heat island, how you sort of propel the effort of urban agriculture and sort of exploit its benefits. We've got to find some sort of elegant relationship to be able that is easily marketable and explainable. But anyway, I mean, that's urban heat island may have something in it, but I think we should definitely widen the conversation.
Okay.
Oscar, sorry, I'm shuffling people around here, trying to make a group picture before the first people need to leave.
I think we're wrapping up now, right?
We're wrapping up, yes.
Great.
There you go.
Great to reconnect with all of you on the phone. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Yes, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
You.